Hey everybody, my name's Jenny, and behind the camera there, that's Kitty.
Hello.
And we're the Naturalist Interns here at the Arboretum. So thank you guys for joining us for another video. And today's kind of special because it's Earth Day. So happy Earth Day, everybody. And Earth Day is so awesome because it really puts such a spotlight on conservation, which we think is amazing and so important. That should be a theme for all days. But because it's extra special on Earth Day, we thought we'd take today to share some conservation initiatives that we have going on here in the Arboretum. So just a little taste of the projects that the Arboretum takes in or is a part of to help protect nature and all that jazz. So why don't we get started actually with the tree right behind me. This is a good tree to start off with. So why don't you guys come and have a look at this guy. So this is an elm tree. We really like elm trees, not only because they're really cool, but they're part of a really cool, awesome project we have going on in the Arboretum called the Elm Recovery Project. And this all kind of has to do with the Dutch elm disease. So if you haven't heard of Dutch elm disease before, it's a fungal disease of elm trees that kind of devastated elm populations in the 1930s. So it's a fungus infection that's spread by elm bark beetles. What happens is you have this bark beetle larva and lives inside the wood of an elm tree. So with an infected elm tree, the larva chews away at the bark and grows and grows and grows until it matures into an adult beetle. And this adult beetle at this point exits this infected host tree, flies over to another tree, another elm tree, and lays its eggs, infecting this new elm tree. And with this infection, what happens is the fungus grows inside the tree and spreads, and the tree, it's trying to wall off this infection, trying to block it off from infecting the whole tree. So it starts to plug up the xylem vessels inside its tree with gums and tyloses, which are these little bladder-like projections in the xylem vessels. So they're trying to wall off this infection. The problem is xylem vessels are part of the vasculature system in a tree, in a plant. It's responsible for delivering water and some dissolved nutrients and minerals to different parts of the plant. So as these xylem vessels get blocked off, the plant starts to starve and eventually it dies. So this is a big problem in the 1930s. All these elm trees were getting infected and dying. And not only that, there are some pretty aggressive control measures to try and get this disease under control. And a lot of healthy elm trees were cut down as well in part of this kind of conservation or aggressive control measures. So elm tree populations in a while had a hard hit. But what happened with the Elm Recovery Project, how it all got started, was with Henry Cox. So he was a horticulturist here at the Arboretum, and he was driving through Ontario one day and he noticed this big elm tree. It's so big, it must have been old enough to have been around during Dutch elm disease. It must have been old enough to have survived it. So he got to thinking, and he put a call out to all across Ontario, and he said, hey, if you have a big elm tree in your property or somewhere you know, let me know. And he went out and he collected cuttings and seeds from all these different giant mature elms that would have survived Dutch elm disease because something made it so these guys survived. And he did research and he figured out that something about genetics of these trees actually made them tolerant to disease. They could get it, but not die. They didn't succumb to it. So this was really important. The trick was all these trees, though, with the genetic resistance, were so far apart from each other in the wild that they weren't cross-pollinating. So the Elm Recovery Project was basically an initiative to turn into a dating service of kinds for all these resistant elm trees. These trees, these cuttings and seeds, they were grown into these trees and they were purposely injected with Dutch elm disease. They were infected and then they could pick out the best of these trees in terms of Dutch elm disease resistance. They would then take these trees and kind of cross-pollinate them and create more trees in a population that's resistant to Dutch elm disease, but also genetically diverse. So that's pretty awesome. This is actually an individual that's from part of that project. And not only that, but in our annual plant sale here at the Arboretum, we do this every year. For this year, in terms of the circumstances of the year, definitely keep a close eye on the social media. As we get closer to that, we can update you guys on what's going on with that. But on our annual plant so we actually sell Dutch elm disease resistant elms from the Elm Recovery Project, which I think is so cool. A dating service for trees for conservation.
That's pretty awesome.
I think it's pretty fun. But you know what? It doesn't stop there. It's not just the Elm Recovery Project we have going on. We do have definitely different initiatives as well. So I actually might turn it over to Kitty to have a look at our next project. All right, so for our next stop, I'm gonna bring you to another awesome tree here at the Arboretum, so follow me. All right, so another really fantastic tree here at the Arboretum. Are these all around me? These trees are called Kentucky coffee trees. Now, Kentucky coffee trees are in of itself really cool. If we take a look around, we might be able to see one of their seed pods still hanging around the tree. So let's see if we can find one. I think there's one. It may be a little tough to see right at the top of this tree here. They have these giant seed pods. And that's actually why they're called Kentucky coffee trees. See, a long time ago, early settlers used to make coffee from those seed pods. So that's what they earned their name. And if you look at the branches, you'll notice that these branches, compared to some of the other trees we have around, they seem really spread apart. There's a lot of spaces between those branches. And that's for good reason. The Kentucky coffee tree wants to make sure there's lots of space between their branches because it wants to leave room for their leaves. They have what we call compound leaves. So instead of having a single leaf blade, like something you might see like maybe a maple leaf, they actually have leaves that are separated into smaller leaflets. So that's what we call a compound leaf. And their compound leaves are huge. They can grow up to almost 1 meter long, earning them the title of the tree with the longest and biggest leaves in all of Canada, which is pretty cool. Now, the reason I wanted to share with you this tree is because the Kentucky coffee tree was one of the trees, one of the species that had a really important research project done. At the Arboretum, not only do we have amazing conservation initiatives like the Elm Recovery Project, but we also have a lot of research that happens here on the grounds on plant species, on animal species, on all sorts of things. And those have really important implications on how we can act to put the other conservation initiatives in place in order to protect our biodiversity. So the Kentucky coffee tree was part of a pretty cool research project that happened here at the Arboretum. See, as you notice with the seed pods, their seed pods are really giant and they're really huge. And they're also really important for this tree. To understand why, we can think of maybe something like a blackberry bush. See, this blackberry bush, in order to reproduce, it wants to spread its seed far and wide so that it could grow into new blackberry bushes. The trouble with that is that plants, they're rooted into the ground. They're not very good at moving around. So to spread its seed around, a blackberry bush would make these really delicious blackberries, these delicious fruits that I love to eat and a lot of other animals love to eat as well. So imagine this, a blackberry bush, it's full of delicious blackberries in the summer, and out comes a little bunny. And this little bunny will hop along and see these delicious berries, and it's gonna munch away on them. He's gonna eat a ton of these berries, and what's inside of these berries are what's important. They're the seeds. So bunnies will eat these fruits and they'll hop around and go far away and poop out the seeds. And what happens is, when they poop out the seeds are now far away from the parent plant. They could grow into a new blackberry bush. So the reason that blackberry bushes will produce these delicious berries is so it can use animals to help them spread their seeds. And that's why the Kentucky coffee tree makes seed pods. These are kind of like the delicious food for some animal to eat and carry far away from the parent plant and spread its genetics. The problem is these seed pods, they're really big and they have a really tough shell. Of course, it's not going to be very delicious for me or any other animal around today, but it was really delicious for some animal that we did have living here once upon a time. These seed pods are so giant you can imagine they're probably made for a really large animal. And if you could think of the largest animal in your mind, what do you think of? I know when I think of it, I think of things like elephants. And it seems a little bit funny to imagine an elephant roaming Ontario today, but we did have some sort of animal like that once upon a time. Way back a long time ago, we actually had woolly mammoths and mastodons roaming our land. These are kind of like primitive elephants, and back then there also was Kentucky coffee trees. This is a very old species, and when mastodons and woolly mammoths roamed the ground, they loved to munch on the seed pods of these Kentucky coffee trees. What happens is they are tough enough to eat the seed pods and leave the seeds inside intact, and they'll roam around and travel very far distance and then poop the seeds out. And those seeds grew into new Kentucky coffee trees, and that's how the Kentucky coffee tree actually spread its seed, is by using these woolly mammoths and these giant mastodons, these huge elephant-like animals, to eat its fruit. But of course, it's a little bit tricky to think about that today because we don't have any of those animals around anymore. They're now extinct. The thing is, Kentucky coffee trees, they're still around. And that's actually what we call an ecological anachronism. It's missing its seed dispersal partner. So it makes it really tricky now for it to disperse its seed. It's not very good at blowing in the wind like a dandelion. It's very heavy. It's not very good at floating down maybe water because it's not very buoyant. So it has a really hard time spreading its seed, and that makes it in a little bit of trouble. This is actually a species at risk. But what we did here a number of years ago is the Kentucky coffee tree. We wanted to see if its seeds would grow better after it's passed through the digestive tract of an elephant. So we collected a lot of these seeds and we partnered with the African Lion Safari and we fed their elephants our Kentucky coffee seed pods. Now, of course, the elephants, they first took a look at the seed pods and decided they didn't want to eat them. They thought it was kind of gross looking, they weren't too sure. And then we covered it with cherry syrup, and then they decided they really wanted to eat them. So they ate all these seed pods, and then they pooped out the seeds. And then people sorted through the poop, got all the seeds, and planted them and see if they grew any better. Now, the results weren't conclusive on this project, but I thought that this project is a really cool example of some of the really fun research projects that happen here at the Arboretum. It's definitely one of my favorite ones. And not only that, but we also have research projects that happen at the Arboretum from researchers that are not from Guelph, from researchers that are studying at the University of Guelph, from undergraduate classes, all sorts of things on not only trees, but on things like bumblebees and other animals, and a lot of at-risk species as well. And that can give us really valuable information on how we can continue to protect these trees and other animals. So I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, this is a pretty cool threatened species here in Ontario, so it's important to learn as much as we can about them. But you know what? We have other threatened species of trees here in the Arboretum as well, and there's another project that's kind of linked to that.
Yeah, so not only do we have the Kentucky coffee tree that's a species at risk in the Arboretum, but we have other trees that are at risk here that you can visit as well. So let's go visit another one of those. Oh, speaking of seed pods, this is a Kentucky coffee seed pod.
Oh, good find.
Yeah, you'll notice it's really giant. The outer husk there, this is a little bit of an older one, but it's really tough and hard. And all the seeds are on the inside. I don't know if I could open this for you guys.
Yeah, a good clue to if a plant is an ecological anachronism is you'll find its seeds or seed pods right on the ground underneath the parent tree. It hasn't been dispersed. Animals haven't been eating away at it or anything like that.
This is a pretty
It's an old one.
Pod. Oh, and you can still see the seeds inside. Look at that. So these are the seeds inside the seed pod.
So even for such an old seed pod, it's still tough to get through that outer husk to get to the seeds inside. So that's kind of cool.
Pretty neat find. All right, we're gonna go visit another really cool tree here at the Arboretum and talk about another initiative that we have. All right, another one of my favorite trees at the Arboretum are these right here. These are honey locust trees. They are known for their fantastically pointy, sharp bits all over their trunk and branches.
Also a personal favorite of mine.
Now the reason I wanted to show you these rare plants is because we have something at the Arboretum here called the Rare Woody Plants Program. And one of the biggest points about this program is about preserving and conserving some of the at-risk species of plants that we have here in the province. Now, it all started off a number of years ago when Arboretum staff went out and started surveying and documenting over 20 species of rare woody plants we have here in Ontario. And this is really awesome because not only can we see how the populations are doing, but also we were able to inform property owners about the cool plants that they had in their property. And not only would they become more aware of the awesomeness that is around them, but also they could do their own little part in helping conserve these species as well. Because Arboretum staff, they also took seeds and cuttings from these plants and they brought them back here in the Arboretum and we planted them here. And this is really, really important because it provided a really safe space for them to grow up. And it was a kind of like a last conservation stand just in case, a safety net, just in case those wild populations of these rare plants didn't do so well. So what happens is eventually it established what we call a living gene bank of these rare woody plant species. This was really, really important because it conserved the genetics of these rare woody plants, even though in the wild, maybe that neighborhood with all of those Kentucky coffee trees were bulldozed over and those wild populations are no longer standing. And that means if we want to repopulate a wild space with these plants, what happened was that we can have these genetics in place to repopulate them. Genetics from wild populations are really, really important because that meant that they were adapted to survive in that environment. If we took honey locusts maybe from down south in the US and brought them up here to grow, what happens is those trees, the genetics of those individual trees were not adapted to survive in our Ontario habitat, so they may not do as well. So having this living gene bank of all these rare woody plants in our Arboretum is just another example of all the conservation initiatives that we have to protect the species in our world. And I think that's really, really awesome. Now, of course, today is Earth Day, and that's all about it. All about appreciating and conserving nature, and we try to make that every single day at the Arboretum. This is just a snippet of the different things that we do here to try and help nature. But if you want to help at home, these are not the only things that you can do. You don't have to take great big stands like planting living gene banks in your backyard, but you can do smaller things to help as well, like maybe turning off the lights when you're not in the room, or maybe trying to reduce the amount of waste you produce. All sorts of little things can really help add up to protect nature. So my challenge for you today is to try do your best, appreciate nature, and see what you can do, what we can all do together to help protect the beautiful natural world that we live in. So thank you so much for hanging out with us, and I hope you have a wonderful Earth Day.